Hello everyone, welcome back to the MotoGP Podcast, and it's 2 wins in 2 races for Marc Marquez after he wins a dramatic San Marino Grand Prix. But it was absolute chaos in the title fight, with Jorge Martin having a perfect weekend up to that point, leading and winning the sprint, and then on Sunday making an absolute costly error which sees his title lead shrink to 7 points to Pecco Bagnaia, who had a solid weekend with 2 second place finishes. But will he be wanting more, and will he be fit enough as he comes round to the next Misano in 2 weeks' time? Joining me as ever is Lewis Duncan and Pete McLaren. And Pete, where do we start with this weekend? It looked like if it had followed Saturday's race, it would have been pretty much Martin and Bagnaia again, but the weather gods played something there, and Marc Marquez struck and took his opportunity like he always does in these conditions.
Yeah, it was Marc the Predator again, wasn't it? Yeah, as you say, Marc thought he destroyed his weekend in qualifying, didn't he? With that crash, starting ninth on the grid. No one wins at Misano from that far back, do they? And then we had this rain shower, which was almost like a pace car. Everyone closes up, he gains all those positions, and then they're released again, and we get that 17 lap, almost like a sprint again. Head to head, him and Bagnaia. Dry conditions, Martin obviously out of the picture, but Pecco also injured, and knowing that Martin is out of the picture as well. But the pace that Marc had at the end of the race, I think, obviously great for him to win at home, Grassini's home race. Great line about Fausto sprinkling some rain, wasn't there? And, and that kind of thing. But I think Marc's going to bring from this weekend into the next round is that pace at the end of the race and the dry, wasn't it? And it sets it up perfectly, doesn't it, for the rematch in 2 weeks' time? Yeah,
it does. Yeah, and like Pete said, Lewis, qualified ninth. I think the lowest position anyone's ever won from here is 8th place, and the conditions suited him, but his pace, as Pete said, was incredible. Lap 20, he set a new race lap record. I mean, it just showed that when he got out front, he still had the pace, didn't he, to challenge Bagnaia?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we saw that on Friday as well through practice. The pace was there for Marquez in dry conditions, maybe a step behind Pecco and Martin, but to a point where Marc could be there to make the difference, as we've seen quite a few occasions this year. I mean, without that rain, I think we were looking at a completely different Grand Prix for Marc. 5th in the sprint. You look at his pace when even in the Grand Prix when he was in traffic, and it was a second slower than the leaders, which goes to show just how difficult it is to race at Misano, and especially now with all the right height devices and aero, and it makes it just a much more difficult race to be. But this is motorsport, and you get these moments where the conditions play a part, and it's the best ones generally rise to the top in that, and that's Marc. He everyone else backs off in those types of conditions. As he sees rain, he's like, okay, look, game on here, I'm going to go for it. And there was a couple of crucial points in that Grand Prix lap 7 when the rain started. The lead for Marc to Pecco was down from 5.5 seconds to 2 point something because Pecco had backed off so much, and then he overtook 5 guys in 1 lap, including Pecco, and was about 2 seconds quicker than the rest of them, and that was the point. And then the conditions obviously settled down. But at that point, you're in the lead, you can control the pace, and that was, and it was, as you say, that point was the real genius in Marc, how he was able to control it, and then, later on, really twist the screw into Pecco, and it's like winding back the clock again for Marc.
Yeah, it really was. It wasn't a Pete. It was like just a reminder of how good he was years ago at judging those conditions perfectly, and he had to wait, 1,043 days between Grand Prix wins, and he's had, like I say, 2 and 7, and it's like, well, he understood that. He said after that he followed the local guys. He didn't want to make a decision based off, say, we'll get on to Jorge Martin's decision, but to understand that in that moment, to follow the local guys, the local knowledge of Bastianini and Bagnaia, just shows how he thinks on a motorbike, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. That's it. It's all confusion in those kind of situations, isn't it? And as you say, as we saw with Martin, and it's easy to mess things up. And he had a plan. He stuck to it. I'll follow what the local guys are doing, and we all know what Marc can do in those conditions. And we were speaking about it just before we came on air, wasn't it? 1 year ago, was when these rumours of him leaving Honda began. And he's coming back now, having won 2 races in a row, factory Ducati contract. How much things have changed for him. is remarkable just in 1 year since Misano. So and confidence, that's the big thing for Marc, isn't it? He's building confidence almost every week. He gets a bit more confidence in a different area, and that's when Marc's dangerous, is when it's a confidence thing, especially in those conditions as well. You've got to have confidence in yourself, haven't you? And it just showed that he has got the confidence back now. So let's see where he can go from here. He's not out of the title fight yet.
Definitely not. And I was going to ask you this, Lewis. So since Austria, his base setup, he seems really comfortable. They found a step, and he kept saying on Friday that would be test if he could carry that Austria form. He wasn't really looking at Aragon because it was unique, and he did do that. And as Pete says, he's 53 points off the championship lead. I mean, he kept getting asked yesterday about, are you in it? And he just kind of said, well, I'm closer than I was last week. But secretly, that side of his garage, they must be thinking, there's something good that's happening here.
Yeah, when he was saying those comments, you could kind of see the twinkle in his eyes, though. You could see just, it is starting to dawn on him a little bit that this is now possible. And yeah, I mean, it's 3 races in a row now. He's kind of hit the ground running on a Friday, and that's what he's talked about all year, has kind of been missing. That every Friday he's come to a new circuit on the bike, and they've no references really, so he's having to find his way. And now that whatever breakthrough they made with Red Bull Ring, and I think it probably stems back to what he said in Aragon about it's not looking so much at what the GP24s are doing, and setup wise there, and focusing on what the GP23 does. And getting the best out of it. And 53 points isn't a big gap anymore in MotoGP. You get 37 for a weekend. We've seen over the past few weeks how it changes very quickly. At one point, Jorge Martin, there was a threat he could leave the San Marino Grand Prix 31 points clear. Bagnaia is now only 7. It's these things just keep twisting and changing. But while both Pecco and Martin have their moments of inconsistency and problems, it's now come at a point where Marc's found real consistency, and I think they will start to be worried about that because he's in the best position. He's got nothing to lose. Yeah, there's no expectation on him to win a championship in his first year on a GP23 versus the reigning double world champion and the guy that was runner-up last year. There is more expectation on them, and Marc will know that, and therefore I think now we're at a point where when he races Pecco and Martin, the rules of engagement change because they have to think about the races in a much, much more different way to him, and he will look to exploit that. Sunday was a perfect example. Pecco saw Martin pit and he was like, okay, self-preservation, don't need to crash, big opportunity here, conditions, all the rest of it. Marc, he'll know. He knew that Pecco wasn't going to take the risk, and now there'll be more opportunities for that to happen. I think because those guys will start to be more wary of mistakes because we're at a point now where every mistake now is costly. And Marc, if he makes a mistake, doesn't matter. He's not really a championship contender as far as he's concerned. Pecco and Martin, disaster, especially if Marquez keeps up with these form that he has done.
Yeah, definitely. And Pete, the final thing we'll touch on with Marquez, I'm kind of gutted he's leaving Gresini, to be honest. I don't know why. Like, the atmosphere that they've built around him and his brother being there this year, the celebrations that you see, the fact they've got a couple of wins now, the fact that he'd done it yesterday, Gresini's home race in the Fausto Gresini tribute livery, the colours, he thanked Fausto for the rain, dedicated it to the whole Gresini family. Kind of got it the story's going to end at the end of the year because it's really brought out a side of Marquez that a lot of fans had never seen before, and especially in the media as well. Just a real sort of he just seems a different person now, doesn't he?
Yeah, he has sort of revelled in that environment, hasn't he? He's been in that very corporate, Repsol Honda, the factory Japanese team, and he's going to another factory team, and they're serious. At Ducati, certainly a lot of sponsors, a lot of marketing that he's going to have to, commitments that he's going to have to do, and I think. Yeah, Gresini is a lot freer, isn't it? And you can see that he's really enjoyed it. As he said, it's exactly the team that he needed for that point in his career, where he was almost kind of lost. And do I keep doing this? Can I keep doing this? Am I enjoying it? It was what he needed, wasn't it? To go into that situation where you go to a race weekend, you're racing alongside your brother as well in the team, and you're back on a bike that's competitive, and it's just fueling him, isn't it? He's in his 30s now. He's got to find. you've got to find new motivations, haven't you? And we saw Rossi was so good at that, sort of reinventing himself. And I think that's what we're seeing with Marc. He's going through that now after so long at the same team, that same environment, same Repsol colours, year after year. This big change, and he's really, he's progressed from it. It must have been a difficult decision to take, but it's paid off so well for him. And he's just getting stronger and stronger at the moment.
Yeah, and on the subject of Repsol colours, we'll come on to that later on in the podcast because, there's some news to break there, so stick around for that. Yeah, Lewis, the title fight we'll get into now, it looked like Martin played an absolute blinder over the weekend. I was so impressed with his sprint. I mean, that start was incredible. I don't know if it's just me. Bagnaia kept saying that he didn't get a great start, and this. I've watched the replay back about 20 times. Martin just gets an absolute incredible launch, and Bagnaia did get a good start compared to the front row as well. It looked so good, and he probably would have been praying that the rain maybe stayed away so he could have a go again at doing the same on Sunday. But what an error from Jorge Martin. He was in the prime position of being behind Bagnaia, being able to judge what he was going to do, and he just made the wrong call and pitted when he didn't need to.
Yeah, it's easy to say in these situations when it's a 50-50, because if you get it wrong, you're an idiot. If you get it right, you're a genius. And it's kind of, had it gone well, we'd be sat here praising Jorge Martin for being a tactical genius. But yeah, it does. But even in that situation around Mazzano, it was kind of inexplicable. If there's one person that's going to know what the conditions are going to do, it's going to be the guy in front of you, who was Pecco Bagnaia at the time, who rides around Mazzano, week in, week out with the VR46 Academy. He knows the place at the back of his hand, so therefore he'll know what the grip is like. It'll be interesting to kind of know what conversations Pramac had on the grid ahead of the race. What was their weather radar saying? What were they telling, Martin? You'd like to think that they have probably the same kind of radar that Ducati factory uses, which informed, Pecco and Bastianini's decision. But yeah, we've seen this before from Martin. Critical errors at really, really crucial moments in championship. We saw it last year in Indonesia when he was leading by quite a margin. We saw it in Australia where he went for a contra strategy on the tyres, which backfired. And if you look at this year with them, when Martin has made mistakes, and there haven't been many of them to be fair, but they've come in Grand Prix, so the hit in points has been a lot larger than for Pecco, for example, who's generally his mistakes have come in sprint races.
Yeah.
So it's just, this was a weekend where Martin really could have twisted the screw. Bagnaia was not fully fit. The sprint race was brilliant from Martin, after a scrappy qualifying as well. And, at the very least, he could have fought for victory again on Sunday and, extended his championship lead, or at the very least stopped Bagnaia from swiping so much out of him. Now it's almost back to zero, coming back to Mazzano. It's going to be a tougher weekend, Emilia-Romagna, because everyone's more dialed in. Obviously the Italians are going to be quick anyway, but you've got guys like Franco Morbidelli in there, the VR46 Ducatis are being there. Marc's obviously not going to make the same mistake twice in qualifying that he did this time. The KTMs were pretty good as well. It's going to be harder for Martin to try and make amends for that next time around. And you see this too often this year between the two of them, though. There's too much of a swing in terms of who's leading. We get big points, and then it gets wiped out, and they can't do that now because they've got to watch for Marc. He is a championship contender, whatever anyone thinks. He is a championship contender for sure.
Yeah, 100%. And I think at that point, I made a point to a friend yesterday. I was like, do they not want to have championship leads with each other? They just want to keep each other so close, and it's great for us watching, but it must be incredibly frustrating for both sides of the garage of Pramac and the Factory Ducati team. Pete, what was your take on it? It's easy, like you say, for us to sit and be like, I made the wrong choice, but you can see at that point, we discussed before, he's looking over the wall and he sees them going round and he must think, oh, what have I done here? It was just a critical error, wasn't it?
Yeah, there's no one size fits all, is there? But I think, as Lewis said, the Phillip Island comparison is a good one because it was, again, a situation where he went somewhere different to Pecco, when really the safe option was to do what Pecco does. Then you either it works for both of you, or it doesn't work for both of you, but you don't get the point swing. And if you're the guy in the lead of the championship with a decent advantage, and you're confident in your ability, let's say if the track dried out, he could have taken the fight to Pecco, and it may well have gone in his favour. So in that situation, I mean, he recognised it, didn't he? Afterwards, he said, "Look, it was a mistake, and I shouldn't have done it." But I think the team have to take a bit of responsibility. I think there was enough spots of rain on the grid to know there's a good chance we're going to have to do a pit stop here. This is what we do, and you run through a few scenarios. If you're behind Pecco, you do this. If you're in front of Pecco, you do this. And you just, because it's so confusing, isn't it, in that situation? But he did have, as you guys have said, that critical advantage of Bagnaia in front of him. That should have been, a big help for him to not make a decision that would backfire. But as soon as he pulled in, obviously Morbidelli crashed. We should say that Morbidelli crashed.
Yep.
Yes, he was behind him, but I think Pecco saw it on the TV screens, didn't he? So we assume that Martin didn't mention it, but I assume Martin maybe saw it on the TV screens as well. And so did that sort of cloud his judgment? Did he think, oh, this guy's flying off left, right, and centre behind me? We don't know. But I think the team, something a bit clearer. There were other guys that sort of took a more mathematical approach. I think Jack Miller, knowing how good he is, looked at the lap time. But of course, for that, you've got to do the full lap. And when look, we know what we can do on wets. This is what we're doing on slicks. It's not worth it. And you can, so there's all sorts of different scenarios you can run through. But the simplest one is, as you guys have said, is that you've got to go with what your main title rival's doing. Unless you're in a real desperate situation where maybe you're the guy you've got a big points lead to make up. You don't have the pace, you just need a miracle. Okay, then you do the opposite and just hope that the gods sort of shine on you. But he wasn't in that situation. It looked like it could be a head-to-head in the dry between those two again, as we saw in the sprint. So, it's it's a mistake that's put the points lead right down again. And I think they'll have to sit down and go, look, okay, we can't afford for this to happen again, obviously, and come up with a system that will sort of rule that out. I know Lewis wrote a good story yesterday about the radio. That was a whole discussion that came in as well, wasn't it? But they have pit boards, they have dashboards. What more? It's the guys on the bike that have to make the final decision, isn't it? I mean, if they'd have flashed up a signal on the dash to say stay out or pit, would he have done that? I don't know. It's so difficult, isn't it? And the radio one, I think Bezzecchi also made an interesting point, which is you can't really hear very well because it's not like a Formula One car with the perfect earplug.
Sure, yeah.
But also the earplugs take away a bit of balance, which is something I hadn't thought of. But I think all of us, you guys are wearing them now, on planes and things. When you wear the noise cancelling things, they do take a bit of balance away. And he cited that as an issue as to why he wouldn't want to wear them, because you want every edge you can get on the bike. So really complicated one. But I think we will see probably radios come in as an option, let's say, in the future. And as Lewis's story said, I think Mark said it'll be good for the show. So, we know that the show is the way things are heading, but I'd be surprised if it's compulsory. And I'd be surprised if people even use them, to be honest. But there may come a time in the future for situations like this. Yeah,
that was going to be my question to you, Lewis, because there was that question got brought up straight away in the post-race debriefs and stuff. Would it have made a difference if Martin had radio saying, just follow Bagnaia? Would he have listened? But like you say, they have dashboards, they have their own pit boards, and they have to use their senses too. And you got a sense that Bagnaia, he says he's quite against it, and so was Bastianini. That situation, it's quite unique, but would a radio communication have helped there?
I think there's a couple of points here. The first one, just going back to Martin, is I think dashboard stuff aside, it kind of, I think, highlighted that his ability to read races isn't as good as his rivals, and I think that's probably the key thing here, rather than any kind of communications, that Martin needs to get better at risk over reward, and also just using his feelings a bit more. He's kind of, I think he probably spooked himself more than anything, and I think that's the crucial thing for Pramac, is you need to set him down and go, okay, you need to just read the situations better, look what's going on around you, look, and follow what other people do as well. On the radio thing, I mean, in theory, had there been radios involved, Pramac could have said to him, look, this shower's going to pass, it's already passed, it's stopped raining, or we've got a spotter out on track who says it stopped raining, or there would be elements there that would inform the rider's decision. But as Marquez said, and Bastianini and Bagnaia in the press conference, really the team will never have a true understanding of what track conditions are really like, and it has to be down to the rider. Would it be good for the show? No, I don't think so, actually. I think that one of the big arguments you have for Formula One team radios is that, it gives fans an insight into, driver to pit kind of communication, what's going on, all the strategy and stuff. But there's a really negative element to that, which is, first of all, you remove control from the racer. Yes, they still have to go drive the car, whatever, but you've taken that kind of strategic element. We used to, obviously they brought in rules to kind of clamp down on some of it, because we used to have qualifying was, like, what sector am I losing here? What time? What's my target time? Blah, blah, blah. It's like, you're supposed to be the best drivers in the world. Go drive the car as fast as possible. Don't look for a delta. Just the delta is if there's a guy in front of you, got to go faster than him. That's it. I think we would have been robbed of a really interesting, dramatic race in Misano with pit radios, because Martin more than likely would have been told to stay out, and then that would have been fine. Things back to normal. The championship points would not be as close as they are. And, when the rule makers and the powers that be really think more about this, I think they have to use this race as a real reminder of why MotoGP is brilliant, and why these guys are just such amazing athletes, because not only are they riding through these conditions, the brain power they're using to try and figure out the best thing, that's what makes champions, that's what makes legends in a sport. Having team radio would take some of that away, because if you're a rider who's unsure, then you've got that fallback, and there are the guys who are even better at judging those conditions don't get to benefit from that. A perfect example, 5-6 years ago, I remember in Argentina, that race where Jack Miller was the only guy to come to the grid on slick tyres, and everyone else was on wet tyres, and then his advantage wiped out because everyone else decided to go to pit lane. And a lot of people were rightly like, yeah, that's not fair. He was the one that made the decision, and, the race has been kind of taken away from him. We don't want that to happen with team radios, and I think that's what would happen, is you take that advantage away from it. If you've got someone, such and such is this amount behind you, blah, blah, blah. I want riders to be like, I've backed off too much because I thought I was safe, and you've got someone attacking them. I think radios kill racing, personally.
No, I completely agree. I think it loses the rider element, and that was stressed by a lot of them yesterday. It's your instinct on a bike is so different compared to a car, isn't it? There's a lot more contact with the elements as such, and you can really see Marc Marquez come to life. Jack Miller comes to life in it. Brad Binder. You see all the riders that really can sense the conditions, and I wouldn't want to lose that. Like I say, I wouldn't want to see teams dictating to the rider. Yeah, I completely agree, Lewis. I don't think it's needed, to be honest. Pete, any takes on it?
Just one small thing, which is, as bad as the decision went for Martin, he knows it was his decision.
Exactly.
And imagine if it had been the other way and the team had called him in and it was their fault, and he'd have been I was going to stay out, but you guys called me in, and it ends up deciding the championship because of a decision made by a team, not by a rider. I think that's the other thing. The only thing at the time I can see that a radio would be of use is something happens on the track and it's race direction.
Yeah,
exactly. That's it. But that's not a team. That's race control to the riders, not the team. So
and they have tested something. They have tested something
like
that, haven't they? Like a kind of more like it's like a beep or like kind of an automated message. But I think the writer. I think it might have been even tested at Misano a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it has been. Fabio Quartararo's done some testing, I think, as well with radios recently at Valencia. I think it was a few months ago and stuff. And like you don't really hear anything of how it went or what it was like. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. But I agree for that instinct, Pete. If there was something wrong on track, it's good that way to have just a one-way communication for them, so they can know when to stop, or if there's an issue or anything, they can do that. But yeah, imagine Moto3s having radios. That would be one of the most hilarious things ever. Would they ever listen? I don't think so. So yeah, keep I think radios out of MotoGP and Grand Prix racing for as long as possible, because having that instinct as a rider is a real advantage, and I wouldn't want to see it disappear. Briefly, just on Enea Bastianini, to both of you, a good weekend for him, a 4-3, and he's still in there technically. He's 62 points off the championship lead. Pete, he just, I think if it was a longer dry race yesterday, I think he would have been on the podium regardless, because I think his pace was strong at the end of the sprint. But he is playing catch up too much, isn't he, on that 24? He's not getting the qualifying right.
That's it. Yeah, the qualifying again, it's setting back, isn't it? Yeah, we've been waiting, haven't we, since Silverstone. Is he going to continue that run and that dominance? And he hasn't quite been able to do it. He had the pace there, as you say, but starting so far back, a bit like Marc. the problems with the overtaking. You can't really do that. I think he went to soft rear tyre as well.
He did,
didn't
yeah.
Which also is a different. Okay, we know he can make the tyres work, but really, I think Michelin were expecting the medium to be the one that people use for the Grand Prix, especially if it had been the normal, let's say normal temperature, the Saturday temperature. It obviously cooled down on Sunday in the rain and everything else. So that's probably going to be what they're going to use next time if conditions are stable. So yeah, he's going to have to make that work and qualify better. But yeah, it's momentum swung back towards Marc again, isn't it? We saw Bastianini come up the standings, take third away from Marc, and it looked like it was just those three in the fight. And now Marc's come back and yeah, he's the momentum's on his side now. So yeah, I think Bastianini, it's not really happened for him in the way that he needs. He needs to consistently be fighting with these top two guys to prove he can fight for the title.
Lewis, what's your take on Bastianini's weekend? It was fairly good when you look at the results, but I get a sense that he probably expected a bit more from it.
Yeah, I agree 100% with what Pete says there. It's kind of, we've waited for this sort of Silverstone thing to carry on, and it hasn't. And I fear it's just typical of Bastianini. We've seen it through his MotoGP career, these flashes of speed, and then it kind of disappears, and then he's great again, especially 2022 when he was winning races, but then it would be followed by periods of, he'd be 10th in a race afterwards and stuff like that. And that's something that Bastianini really, he is still in this championship hunt. He needs to just get that consistency going. You can kind of understand his strategy to go for the soft tyre, given he was starting so far down, and you need that little bit of extra punch early on to try and make up ground, which was fair enough. And on Friday as well, we saw that the soft tyre looked like a good option. Jorge Martin was doing 1:31.5s on a 17 lap old soft tyre, and actually, I kind of really expect him to go that way for the Grand Prix, seeing as how good he was. But it turns out when he was on the soft tyre, he just didn't feel comfortable on the bike at all, despite the lap times, which is, had to race in normal conditions, a bit of a worry for his rivals, given how good he was then on the medium tyre. But yeah, Bastianini, it was a good recovery, but I think, more races like this where he just kind of is in the podium hunt but not quite troubling Pecco or Martin and even Marc. There must come a point over the next few rounds where Ducati goes to him, look, I know you're not going to be here next year, but you are further out the championship hunt than the rest of them. We need you to help Pecco here. Whether any listens or not is a different matter, but there will surely come that conversation, because Bastianini is kind of one mistake away from being pretty much out of the hunt, with 62 points difference right now.
Yeah, I think so. It's getting on that point, isn't it, Pete? As you get to the flyaways, it's like, where's the cut-off point? And it's Anaya's just teetering on the edge. He's only 9 points behind Marc, but still, it seems like Marc has the momentum, and Anaya hasn't, as you both mentioned, he hasn't really carried it over from Silverstone. And I think, if he can have a really strong second Misano, potentially, I don't know what he could do. We've seen in 22 how strong he was if it gets the ideal conditions for him, but he just needs to qualify better, and that's just the plain and simple fact of it. But yeah, Bastianini, he's still in there technically, but out of the four, he's looking the weakest. The KTMs I've got wrote down, they had a really good weekend, didn't they, Pete? All considered, Acosta, I think, was incredible on Friday. He showed some real strong pace that, when you looked at it for the sprint, you thought, well, he could actually challenge for a podium and maybe give the top two a run for their money. But in the Grand Prix, he crashed yesterday. He lost a wing after contact. Yeah, but Brad Binder was P4. Jack Miller was, I think, P8. So he was a strong performance from the KTMs, even though conditions suited them in the Grand Prix. But they had a decent weekend.
Yeah, I think definitely for Acosta, he's gone back to these old settings, hasn't he, from the start of the year. It looks like he's refound his confidence. A bit like Marc almost. He's gone through this lull, and now they've got the bike where they're happier again, and he's showing what he can do. And fighting with Binder, and beating Binder, isn't he? And that's the other side of it. As you say, in the race, I think Tech2 said he was a little bit impatient with that collision with Morbidelli that took the wing off. That maybe, given his speed and everything else, if he'd have just been a little bit more careful there, it could have been a lot better for him. But still, the speed is there, and that's the important thing. We've seen he is coming back. He's building this momentum, and he's giving all the other KTMs trouble. I'm not sure on the other side if the general KTM improvement is sort of being a bit exaggerated by the Aprilias dropping down and away from the order. If they were still up there again, that would be other bikes in the mix, and they'd still be sort of lower end of the top 6 again. So I think it's a combination of things going on. But I think for Acosta personally, definitely these last couple of races, he's come back to where we kind of expected him to be from the start of the year.
Lewis, what's your take on KTM's weekend?
Yeah, like Pete says, I think the overall improvement of KTM is still really hard to read, and that's just been the case all year, really. And but yeah, you're spot on there as well, Jordan. Pedro's pace on Friday was really, really strong. It was up there with Martin and Bagnaia, and I genuinely believed that we would see Pedro being much more of a factor in the podium battle than we were, but it just seems when we get to races that whatever issues it is that they have on the KTM, that they talk about but don't actually tell us what it is, and KTM doesn't really like to tell the media about anything anyway, so it just, whatever it is, it seems to come at the wrong time, and you can when you listen to Pedro, you can tell he's frustrated because he knows he's got the pace, he's got the potential to be up there fighting for podiums. He said after Friday, and maybe in terms of speed it wasn't our best sort of feeling, but in terms of just overall feeling on the bike, we're there. That's what he said. That's what he said. We're there. We're up there. So I think he will be disappointed about this. Sunday was a learning experience. He's not done a flag to flag race before, so it's kind of, so you can understand why he boxed as well. Crashed, nothing to lose. Fair enough. He's got a bike swap under him. He knows.
Yeah.
Well, he knows what not to do now, so it was a valuable learning exercise for that. I mean, you remember a few years ago, was it Le Mans 2020 when we had a flag to flag race, and actually
21.
Most of your kind of front runners, like Mir was world champion of Quattro's, hadn't actually ever done a flag to flag race, so they were all really kind of completely
that's right
out of sorts. So Pedro's kind of had that learning lesson at a point where he wasn't fighting for anything. So that's, I guess you could look at that as a positive. But yeah, I think if, coming back to Misano, I'll be interested to see what Pedro can do if that pace carries on, and if they can just, whatever the problem is, just fix that problem so he can be a bit more consistent. Because this San Marino Grand Prix was one of those weekends where what we saw on Friday just did not translate really in any way, shape or form into what the rest of the weekend went, for various reasons. But there was a lot, I think we expected a lot more from certain people, and it never materialized, and which is very, very surprising.
Yeah, and for the rest of the manufacturers, Pete, especially Aprilia, I mean, it's been a really tough, you could say, second half of the season really for them. They're really struggling, and I suppose the weekend, I mean, on track it was tough, but they had a bizarre incident, didn't they, Pete, with the Moto2 incident where the bike ended up in the Aprilia garage, and thankfully no one was seriously hurt, but just kind of sums up where they are at the minute. There's nothing's going right, or there's just chaos what's happening with their general weekends.
Yeah, I think Aragon, the dirty track, the low grip, we weren't too shocked, were we, that Aprilia struggled in those conditions, but we all expected a high grip Misano, a track they know well, that they'd be back up there. Certainly Vinales goes well there, doesn't he? It's not been too great for Aleix, but Vinales goes well there, and just really they struggled all weekend, didn't they, for pace, and Vinales complaining about consistency under braking, and the bike doing one thing one lap, one thing another lap, and just struggling. And then, as you say, this thing on Saturday morning, really scary with the Moto2 bike. It seems like a marshal or a track worker stepped off the pit wall at the start of the Moto2 final practice, so lots of bikes coming out together, thought they'd all gone by, or they sort of come in waves, don't they? It is easily done, as Simon Crafar said, who was watching it, witnessed it, because it wasn't on TV. Mm-hmm. The rider, forward rider, I think it was Aradra, he clipped the marshal and wherever it was. Then they both fell off. We're okay, but the bike carries on and swerves into the Aprilia garage, and fortunately sort of didn't hit anybody too seriously. I think someone might have hurt their hand, one of the mechanics, but crashes into the back of the garage. So really, really scary thing to happen, and fortunate that everyone escaped relatively unharmed.
Yeah, and it's just, when you look at Aprilia for Vinales, aside, Lewis, he was fighting Martin for 16th yesterday. 15th. I'm just thinking, where's it gone wrong from Maverick at the start of the year? He was so good, and it's just disappeared, hasn't it?
Yeah, the Aprilia drop is actually quite alarming, I think, because like Pete says, with Aragon, when they expected, okay, well, clearly we rely too much on high grip, so fine, we'll go to Misano, it should be better. And it just from the off, at least at Aragon on Friday they were quite quick. When there was grip on the track. At Misano there were nowhere all weekend. I think Maverick got into Q2 directly, but that was it. And even the trackhouse riders really struggled, and the problem is they just don't seem to know what the problem is. That's fundamentally the issue. They've had two completely different weekends and they're just completely lost, and that's a worry. Massimo Rivola, I think, said on the World Feed broadcast before the race on Sunday that obviously when you develop a bike, sometimes you go in the wrong direction, and clearly we've gone wrong somewhere. But I think it's the fact that they don't know where is the problem. And we going back to Jorge Martin, this is going to add a bit more pressure on him this year to try and win this championship, because if you're looking at that, you're going, I'm not jumping on a bike that's fighting for the championship next year. I might not even be jumping on a bike that's fighting for race wins for the first start of next year. So we've gone from a point where Aprilia winning races, front runners, able to hook really big riders, to kind of again winding back the clock to 4 or 5 years ago when they were genuinely the most uncompetitive bike on the grid. And it's to come away from Misano weekend being beaten by Yamahas right now and Hondas as well. You've got to. There's got to be a really serious, long, hard look in the mirror amongst Aprilia management right now.
Yeah, I couldn't have summed up any better. And as you mentioned, Yamaha, I've got wrote down here, Fabio Quartararo, it seems that the test, Pete, that they had at Misano was really paid off. He had a really good weekend. He was 9th in the sprint, got a point, and he was 7th yesterday. And it just shows that they are making the right steps, and he's able to maximise when you can see it for the first time, where he's tested at a track where he's able to really understand what the Yamaha does. And he executed it to the best of his abilities yesterday.
Yeah, it was a reminder, wasn't it, of the quality of Quartararo as a rider. He's not a world champion for nothing. And when he gets these chances to show what he can do, we saw a bit at Le Mans as well, didn't we, this year, where he's got a chance of being competitive. But he's on the limit a lot, isn't he, doing it? I think he was keen to point out there was no massive breakthrough this weekend. This wasn't like they found some huge change that's going to put them up there for the rest of the year. They did have a new chassis, didn't they? But I think... he just, for whatever reason, he was expecting a much tougher time, especially in qualifying, where at the test it had been a disaster, I think, trying to do the time attack. So he was really thinking, we're going to struggle here. They were okay on pace at the test, but qualifying they struggled. And he also did, on the other side, he didn't think that they gained too much from the track knowledge of the test, shall we say. So he did think it was a genuine performance. He said that helped them in FP1. But after that, everyone else has kind of got a setting, got an idea of the track, and away they go. So yeah, I think it was an encouraging start, and a bit like with Aprilia, if we rewind a bit, they've now got, luckily for them, I suppose, they've got a test today and they've got another race weekend to get on top of it, and that'll be the key to see if they can. If they can't, then that's an even bigger worry, because if you have 4 more days at a track where you're really struggling and you're not making progress, then that is a real head scratcher. And on Yamaha's side, they've made some progress. Now we've got to see, can they build on that over these next 4 days that they're going to have on track? And presumably they will have some new parts that they'll test today that they can bring for the next weekend as well. So important event for those two manufacturers coming from different ends, if you like.
Yeah, and Lewis will go to the other Japanese manufacturer, Honda. I mean, Joan Mir didn't even step on foot on track. At one point this weekend, he didn't even bother. He was quite sick, and Luca Marini yesterday had to pull out due to illness as well. I can't really analyse on this weekend other than Stefan Bradl getting 2 points and Nakagami getting 3 points and Zarco getting 4 points. They're still all with each other when you look at it, but yeah, a big day today for them at the Misano test, as we're apparently going to see a new bike, and then also the Repsol news of the sponsorship ending at the end of this year, end of an era truly for Honda. It feels like it's really, how could you put it? Not that they're at their lowest, it feels like everything has changed so dramatically in the space of 12 months.
Yeah, I mean, who'd have thought, 5-10 years ago we'd see Repsol not being part of the Honda stable, and it was just and Repsol Honda just used to be a guarantee of success, for 30 years almost.
Yeah.
Honda's. You look at Yamaha and there's genuine kind of steps forward, and all season it's looked like there's been genuine steps forward. Whereas for Honda, kind of from the off, the riders saying we went the wrong way with the engine in pre-season, blah blah blah, direction's wrong. And despite the fact they've got concessions, it's been a really slow process to actually get anything through. It wasn't until Austria that we had kind of an updated engine. It wasn't even a new engine, and again, one of the problems Honda seems to have is that, and this was something Paul Espargaro used to speak about was when he was there, was that they're all on different things. There's no uniform sort of direction they go with a bike. That seemed maybe over the last couple of weeks to have changed a little bit. They all seem to more or less be going in the same direction, so the feedback's the same, and at least they're settling on something. But yeah, I mean, Zarco talked about, he wanted to do something in these conditions, a real opportunity, but he couldn't because he just could not push on that bike. He just didn't want to crash. And, when you've got a situation like that where you can't even capitalize on a level playing field, that's when you know how far off you are. You look at when Ducati used to be quite a bad bike, but on wet races and flag-to-flag races, there was an opportunity there to get podiums. They really maximise those kind of situations. Honda just aren't now, and you look at last year when they were funny conditions in Marquez, Japan for example, would get on the podium. I think it goes to show just how much of an impact he's had, there when the bike's been at their lowest. I'd like to think that whatever Honda brings to this Misano test, this radical all new bike will definitely point in the right direction. But we've heard this before. We were told last year, the Misano test is going to be big. They're going to come with new stuff, blah blah blah. Stefan Bradl tests what was essentially that bike in the race last year. The other riders jump on it, and it's like, this isn't a difference. And it more or less that was the point where Marquez, I think, was like, yeah, okay, I'm gone.
Yeah.
All this coincided with Repsol leaving when, it's every few years we have this rumour, this will be the last year Repsol with Honda, and then they sign for a few more years. But it has been a long sort of standing kind of report this year that this was going to end. And the timing of the report was, with the announcement on Sunday, was, I can't fathom that. 10 minutes after the Grand Prix, your riders haven't even taken part. It just, from a PR perspective, it just looks like, that just doesn't look good. It looks like you're a team that's about to step away from the championship, not a team that's trying to develop its way back to being world champions. And, I think what was, with the Repsol thing, I think this is really another, probably the final aftershock of Marquez's departure. Yeah. If Marc was still there, Repsol probably, would they have stayed? Yeah, I think so. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you have your name associated with the biggest guy in MotoGP? Now that isn't the case, and yeah, I think now we have hit rock bottom for Honda. I think this is the worst. So, in theory, this is when things should start to turn around, but I don't know. I just don't see Honda doing that before the rules cycle changes, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, and as Lewis mentioned, Pete, to announce it yesterday, the Repsol split at the end of the year, not to renew the contract after Marc Marquez has won on a year-old Ducati, it almost feels like a PR sort of job, doesn't it? It's like, this is what we had, and it's, look what's happened. It's kind of all just fell apart, and it's quite sad, because I've always grown up, Repsol Honda was the bike, the team, and you always associated the colours with Rossi, Doohan, Marquez, Hayden, Stoner, Pedrosa, and the list goes on. But now it feels like it really is a true change that we're seeing, isn't it, for HRC?
Yeah, HRC and MotoGP, it's a loss, isn't it? There's not many big sponsors left in MotoGP. I thought the tobacco, companies left. Repsol's been one of those brands that has put a lot of money into the sport, hasn't it? And obviously into Honda. And so to lose them, let's hope that we won't lose them completely. But we saw Petronas leave, obviously, and they have still some branding at the tracks and I think event sponsorship. But what will Repsol do? We don't know. This announcement, it just made a vague reference to continuing a link with motorsport and things like that, but nothing concrete about certainly motorcycle racing, let alone MotoGP. As you say, we saw it sort of downgrade, didn't we, this year, where the Repsol went to the bottom of the fairing, and that was the first sign that there was this big change. was coming, and presumably the contract, would have had to go to the end of the contract. And let's remember, Marc's contract would have ended this year, wouldn't it? So I think exactly as Lewis is saying, if Marc was still there, you've got to imagine they would have resigned. But Marc finished his contract a year early. The Repsol one has now expired, and they've clearly chosen not to renew theirs. So I don't think that's a coincidence. Yeah, and the timing, but you can look at it for various different angles. It's almost like burying news to put it out, to put that out at that time, or do you look at it as you say, a jab of the guy that we did have and that we were signing up for, if you like, is now winning with someone else. Let's see where they get. Let's hope that they don't leave entirely. We've got this 100% non-fossil origin fuel coming in, which Repsol had kind of made quite a lot of on the marketing side, hadn't they, and things like that. But are they walking away completely? Let's wait and see.
Yeah, I think the statement have it here. It does say at the last line they are going to continue in some form of motor racing and developing. So Pete, I think maybe that's what they're hinting at, that new fuel could be developed still. They're not going to fully step away, but definitely a strange time to announce it, and could have announced it today. If that could have been it. Lewis, any last thoughts on it?
I mean, it will not be a great look for MotoGP if Repsol doesn't come back, because it would almost kind of be a show of no faith in its non-fossil 100% sort of non-fossil fuel rules as well, which are coming in 2027. Obviously this year we've had the first of the partially kind of biofuels that we have. So I would be very interested to know kind of what Dorna's take of this is, because like Pete says, Repsol's put a lot of marketing into its kind of 100% renewable fuels and stuff like that, and for them to walk away on the eve of that being a really big moment for your company is intriguing. It will be a bit of an alarm bell, I think, to Liberty if who are incoming as the owners of MotoGP, because as you say, Pete, there's not that many big sponsors left, and a couple of people noticed. I remember speaking to Pecco Sanchez, Joan Mir's manager, a couple of years ago, and he was like, the money that comes into MotoGP from a lot of these sponsors is very, very small compared to a lot of other sports. I think probably a big first task that Liberty will have on their mind is to try and bring back some major sponsorship. We've got Red Bull, but that's kind of it. Lenovo, sort of a little bit, but we were kind of not that many in the way of really big title sponsors, and this it might not seem like it kind of from the outside, but I think this Repsol thing might well prove to be a bit of a concern longer term for MotoGP in general.
Yeah, and for any more Repsol updates, we'll try and cover anything on our website on Christ.net if anything develops or we hear anything. So head across there, read about the Repsol story as well. It's on there too. And that's pretty much it. We've got testing currently happening. Sorry if anyone's watching. I'm looking down at the times here on my phone. Pedro Acosta's fastest as we are recording this, a 1:32 flat, but it seems that there's only really there's nothing really happening that much because of it was kind of wet overnight, and it's just a test that I think a lot of teams will be wanting to try different setups. We heard Marc Marquez say yesterday he wasn't getting anything new, he was just going to test a few setups, which was disappointing. I wanted to see something there from the test, but it's just how these tests go sometimes, isn't it, Pete? You're expecting it to be really nice, and then you get mixed weather conditions like today.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, let's wait and see for Marc. I think we've all, Lewis knows as well. Riders say, "Oh yeah, we've got nothing," and then sometimes they have something. On the other hand, I think you guys have raised it. The thing with Honda, obviously, that's where the attention is for this test, because we're waiting for these big upgrades. But as Lewis mentioned, Bradl, he had that wild card. They must have been using some new parts on that bike. And there was no big transformation, was there? And so that is the fear, is that this will be like the test a year ago, where there was a lot of expectation of something radical arriving, and the reality on the racetrack was something different. So let's wait and see. There might be another bike, that will get rolled out or has been rolled out overnight, as well as the Bradl bike, if you like, from the race weekend. So let's see what happens there. And just on Acosta, I think the KTM guys, they will try the Pole Espargaro Dani Pedrosa development bike. I suppose those are the two main things that we're expecting from this test. So let's see what Honda come up with, and let's see what the race riders think of the development KTM, which does seem quite different.
Yeah, that was going to be my point to look out for testing. If you see any videos on social or any MotoGP post, listen out for that KTM. It sounds way different compared to the normal one, because you heard it in Austria when they were actually beside each other. I think it was Paul and Jack Miller during a session. You can really hear the audible difference. So yeah, KTM have obviously got a step or a change coming their way. Lewis, anything for any of our listeners to look out for in testing? It's so hard because you don't actually see anything unless you're there. You can only really go off times and videos, can't you?
Yeah, well, going back to the point raised earlier about, Aprilia and Yamaha and such looking for kind of steps forward at a track like this, the overnight rain, I think, actually makes this Misano test a bit more relevant than in previous years, because all that grip's been washed away. And, one of the big things that Yamaha has struggled with and Aprilia struggled with is low grip. So this is kind of the perfect day for them to really actually dig into what their kind of problems are and look for a meaningful solution. And so yeah, that's kind of the intrigue for me, is that we might actually see a genuine step forward from some of these struggling teams heading into the next race at Misano. So yeah, I think that's where the intrigue is for me.
Yeah, and that's pretty much it. We'll have everything covered on socials on our website for the test. If you want to actually, by the time this comes out, it'll be around lunchtime for audio listeners. Test will still be happening, so head across to Christ.net and we'll have our live updates. Everything will be covered there. And yeah, we'll have to wait another week. There's a break now until the next Misano. But yeah, who knows what's going to happen there. We'll be back next Monday for another podcast. And just to end the podcast, gents, I'm sure we echo the sentiments here. Noriyuki Haga's son, Ryoto Haga, lost his life at the weekend in the All Japan Road Race Championship. He was only 21 years old. So yeah, send our condolences to his family and everyone affected by that.